applied it, and so when we started applying it, we said, okay, what's a problem we could apply it to? Well, personal problems. So if you have any personal problems, those are the easy ones. You know, like maybe you've got these kind of things going on, you're avoiding this, or you're avoiding that, or you can't stand this, and you hate the government, you have all those kinds of things. Those are all your personal problems. Is there any person in life that you can't stand? Well, guess who it is? Yeah, well, I love this one. You know that, don't you? If you can't stand them, it's something in you that you're reflecting onto them, and they're acting it out because they're all in coalition. This whole thing is synchronicity in a magnificent field, and I want to talk more about that field. So we have these things called unfolding potential, because what is life in actuality? It's the unfolding of potential. Where does it come from? It comes from the quantum field. And for me, that field is a field of consciousness. So when you get the cyclotrons, you do all these things where you're breaking up all the little photons and so forth, and you find out what they have is what's the smallest little bits, as Dan was saying earlier. The smallest little bits are not little bits at all. They're what they call spinners. Spinners of information. So we're going to talk about how the information is anything in pattern is information. By the way, electricity and shocks and all that are patterns. They all have frequencies. We've been talking about that. And guess what? Anything that has a pattern is in form. And therefore, it's made of information. And when they break these things up, they find them coming and going into hyperspace. That's beyond the range of your senses. Now, I know that you are not the kind of person who believes that the only thing that's real is what you can sense and measure with an instrument, right? You know better than that, don't you? Because there's non-physical manifestation reality. Non-physical manifestation reality. You see it, you don't see it. You sense it all the time. And so you know what I'm talking about. That's why you can sense when your lover is having an affair, or when somebody is hurting that you're close to and they're on the other side of the planet. You can tell what's happening to them because there is a morphogenetic field, a resonating frequency, a whole series of quantum things, the infrared light spectrums, all of these things, many sounds you cannot hear, so your senses are not really trustworthy if you want to get the whole dynamic. Now, I had to name this thing the whole dynamic because people have so many little parts, and it's like the book My Big Toe by Thomas Cornwell. I think it's his name. Can't remember it. Anyway, Thomas, he says, look, it's my big toe. You know what my big toe is? My big theory of everything. Now, most people who have a big theory of everything usually have a little toe. It's like a theory of their little part of it. And if I'm an electronic engineer, I'm going to have my big theory about everything. There are three ways that information organizes in every human being that we can find so far. One is linearly. And so you look at that linear thing and you say, okay, you look at the linear, and what is it doing? It's saying, look, everything is logical, everything is sequential, and it goes like this, one step at a time, that's linear thinking, and it's accurate to a range of about 10 to the minus 7 and about 10 to the plus 7. And that's a pretty big range, so most people are linear. And they're usually aware of certain dimensions in the linear. What's a dimension? A dimension is something you can measure. It's a measurable event in time. So it's a measurable event. That's what they call a dimension. So when you get to different dimensions, they can measure at least 10. And that takes you outside of the range of 10 to the minus 7 and 10 to the plus 7. And what it does is it takes you into another dimension that they discovered 100 years ago. And it was Niels Bohr who said, look, we don't know in this limited logistical, rational format of classical physics, we don't know what holds everything together. We don't know why the energy coming out of a black body is different than it's supposed to be. Those were the two little clouds in a totally blue sky of scientific discovery of the industrial age that ruled our schools and our governments and everything else. They rule our theologies and our whole way of looking at life, our way of doing business and everything else. It's all done by that linear process. And it did do a lot of really great things. And so, that's why I am a scientist, someone who seeks what's real and knows how to deal and learns how to deal with what's real. Anyway, Niels Bohr said it's a harmonic. They laughed him out of town. He said, oh, by the way, he figured out, the harmonics of every element on the elementary table. They laughed him out of town. He said, oh, by the way, you got 5 more elements. Ha, 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 ha. Then they discovered the elements. And quantum mechanics was born, and quantum physics was born, and all these debates that took place. And I was in the middle of some of those debates. It was wonderful. Anyway, quantum physics was born, and it increased our predictability from 10 to the minus 7 to 10 to the minus 14. And then from 10 to the plus 7 to 10 to the plus 14. And that's why half the inventions in today's world are made from quantum thinkers. And when I got to Russia, and I spent 9 years in Russia helping with that Cold War thing, and we got all of that kind of stuff transformed. So what we're doing here is we're saying, well, what else is there? Well, guess where the figures are coming from that they're talking about, that Asim is talking about, Dan and all these guys? They're talking about like 10 to the minus 33. Oh my gosh, guess what? 10 to the minus 33 is exactly the frequencies used by the holodynes inside your microtubes. I can't wait to show you this. I got a PowerPoint, I'll show you this. But I just want you to know that we have used all this kind of stuff to be able to help people solve their problems. We got a drug problem in our high school. 52% of the kids were on drugs. We said, okay, let's see if we can handle that one. So we taught the kids on drugs the stuff I'm going to teach you now. In a year and a half, you could not push illegal drugs in 6 cities in our county. They had a thing called the gathering places, and those kids were able to get right in your face and do this fractal, conjunctional, what do you call it? Yeah, basically, yeah. Yeah, conjugation, thanks. Boy, when you get over the trail as many times, my gears start slipping. But anyway, yeah, so you do that, but that's what we're doing, only we don't call it that. And so you can take a look at what we're doing, and then so they did this, and you couldn't even push drugs, and they beat the kids up, they floated free heroin for $60,000 or something like that, worth of free heroin, and nobody would take it in 6 cities. So then they sent in the CIA and those kinds of people, and they tried to wreck it, and they couldn't. Because you know that there are certain organizations in the government that do covert activities that are funded by drugs, don't you? There's all those kinds of little problems, and if you think that's a problem, guess what? You're the one who then could think up the solution. And here's what we found out. Every problem is caused by its solution. We planned it. And how do we know that? Well, I'll show you. I'm going to show you the multiple dimensions of this thing so that you can learn to be conscious and actually emerge. There are 2 processes going on. I got to finish this thing about how information organizes. It organizes linearly, right? You're all familiar with that. Then it organizes in waves, which is quantum waves, the New Age movement. Most of the religious people are talking about the wave dynamics and all that kind of stuff. There are no solutions to anything in the linear or the wave dynamic. I want you to know that. We know that from experience. People who are thinkers can't solve it. They can take it apart. They can criticize everybody. They can take credit for everything. And they can do all of that kind of stuff. They're really good at all that. But when it comes to the real solutions, they're in a 3rd dimension of reality. And that we call creative intelligence, presence. Because every being, every form, anything that has form, has a counterpart that's creating the form. And that's called hyperspatial counterpart. It doesn't mean it's out of space. It doesn't mean it's not here. And it doesn't mean it's not being run by all the laws that were here. But it does mean that there's an R factor. There's an R. Okay? So we're going to talk about there's an R that has to do with our life here that makes it capable of solving every problem we have. This conversation we're having right now is the most important conversation on the planet as far as I'm concerned. Because we're facing things that need solutions. Wouldn't you say that we could use a little help out there? Well, guess who's best qualified to give that help?
You, me.
You are. If it's not us, who? So here we go. You ready? Here's what we teach. How do we do this? Oh, I got it. Yeah, okay. Thanks. This is done by the International Academy of Holodynamics. And here's this. Success is unfolding one's full potential. You all sense that? What else is there? It's It's unfolding your potential. What evolution is all about, it's what consciousness is all about, it's what life is all about. And it's also about lowering your entropy. You're going to lower your entropy level so that you can have a sustainable measurement of time about how your potential unfolds. Okay? Here's how you do it. There are all these circles of success. So I'm going to show you now some of the circles. We have our physical world, our personal world, our profession, our environment. That's not all we have. What are you doing here? Hang on a second. We have our personal, our family, our community, our nation, and our world. All of these are just different dimensions in unfolding our potential. Each one of them are different because you have to be able to, let's see if I can do this. You're not getting it like I am. Okay.
You had a quick time in there?
Oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm pushing the wrong buttons. Hang on. I'll do this up again. Forgive me. I clicked the wrong button. I'm good. So you see this one? I'm going to go down here again. I'm used to doing this on my own computer. Can you look? That's not going to work.
Yes. Sometimes the Mac determines the PowerPoint differently.
Oh, that's what's happening.
We could try this.
Okay.
Let's try some full screen.
Yeah, try this full screen.
Okay, so we're going to lose your face now.
Oh, good, okay. Let's bring it back. Okay. That's the wrong way. No. It's not working anyway.
There's an animation in there that's a little bit different on the Mac than PC, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I wish I had known that because I'm not sure what's going to happen now. But anyway, those are all circles, and they go from, what they do is they go from bigness down to smallest and from smallest up to bigness. So let me just describe that verbally. So if you're going to start at the micro level, because information organizes, we know this, information organizes from micro, that's small parts, to big parts. So if the carburetor on your car isn't working, then your car's not going to go. So if there's something inside of you as a micro thing inside of you, one of these information sets, and it's not working, then you're not going to be working either, and neither are your relationships, because the fractile elements involved, when you have something dysfunctioning inside of yourself, then it's going to dysfunction in your community. So if you can sense that your government isn't working, then guess what's not working? Your internal government. Now, what kind of a thing is that? What's an internal government? I want to show you what your internal government is, because all of our research shows that you have information sets inside of you. And these information sets control your feelings, they control your thoughts, and they control your behavior. And most of us are on cruise control. And when you're on cruise control, and these information systems, we call them holodynes, when these holodynes are controlling you, you are out of control until you choose control. And when you choose control, every one of these information systems have an implicate order of growth. David Bohm's the one who created that concept. He was a friend of mine. And what we talked about was how this implicate order has the stages of development, built-in stages of development for yourself and your internal world, and for your community, and for humanity as a whole. We are maturing as a species. And right now, we're going to show you this, we are an immature species. And we're headed for the cliff. It's that kind of thing. So here are some of these dimensions. Hyperspace, that's this hyperspatial dimension in which the information systems are getting their form here. This is a holographic universe in which the holographic images of us are being projected from another dimension of time and space. It's just a parallel dimension, or it's in, actually we're involved, we're nested in it, so it isn't separate from us. So we each have what guys like Roger Penrose and some of these people call a hyperspatial counterpart. That means something giving us our form. So when your DNA is being created, so to speak, when it's being formed, it's, it's a huge double helix feedback loop that looks like a great big electric coil, great big, there's a billion little connections in it. And what happens is two spinners come out of hyperspace, and as the double helix feedback loop grows, it grows to these two spinners, and then it bridges. This is Carl Pribram's work. And so then 2 more spinners appear, it grows to that, and then it bridges. And it does that until your whole DNA is there. Your DNA creates your RNA. Your RNA then goes to work, and it's the manifold that just basically creates all your cells, tells each cell what to do. And the cells will respond to anybody. You can take, like stem cells out of an umbilical cord, and you can create all kinds of miraculous healings in a body simply by putting the stem cells in the right way, and the body will spontaneously follow its formulas until it creates a healthy liver, or a healthy kidney, or overcomes diabetes, or multiple sclerosis. And they know how to do this. And of course, the politics in it are not yet mature. We have a very immature political system throughout the whole world practically, but it's starting to grow up. And therefore there's rising tides of consciousnesses there, and that's what we're about. So when you start looking at the details of this, you'll see that it goes right down to the micro level, where this information system is coming in, and then it forms the cells, and the cells are networked with microtubules. Now we've already talked a little bit about the microtubules, but I want to show you more about that. So this then is about how everything has potential, and so does business. If you're going to be in business, step 1 is to focus on potential. Focus on potential. Why? Because the business is a living thing. It's an entity. How do we know? Because it's an information system. It has its own brand, it has its own laws, it has its own culture, it has its own stories. We've done all this consultation with different businesses, Bank of America, Toyota, Blue Sky Software, and so forth. And these guys like Boeing had its whole system was falling apart because they had so many orders it couldn't fulfill. We took our trainers in there, trained their trainers, and in 6 months everything had fallen back into coherence. And they were on schedule and producing everything. So there's a way to influence the entire collective consciousness of people everywhere. But first you have to know this fact. To do it, it depends on human focus. Because it's like a camera. What you focus on is what you get. And there's real laws involved in that focus. It's the focus of your conscious intention. It is one of the most powerful things in reality. And we are creating our reality, whether you want to believe it or not. And your belief systems are another part of the reality. And sometimes they are deadly belief systems. In spite of our beliefs in them. We're addicted, actually, to the beliefs of our ancestors. It's one of our addictions. So keep on believing, because, heroin also works. So there's a lot of added-on conditions. Every acorn has a personality, has a potential, every person, every family, every company, every country, and every planet. So we have a potential of consciousness that's unfolding here. Okay? Here's a business. Every situation has potential. Here's the day of the office, right? So what do you do when your office runs like this? Anybody recognize this scene? Every day. You look at that and say, well, be aware what potential exists in every situation, every person and every situation. And then it becomes a one-to-one relationship with those people in that situation. A one-to-one relationship with the people and the situation. A one-to-one. Why? Because the situation is a living entity. And so is every person in it. And you have the information sets of each individual is unique, and therefore the situation is also unique. And it's very dynamic, and it's going on changing every second. How do you keep up with that? There's the secret. How do you keep up with it? Take a look at this one. What do you see? What do you see? What?
I see a happy person.
You see a happy person. What else do you see? A flower. So maybe if we expand our view a little bit, you could look at the flower and say, what's the value of the flower? Okay, I'm in the way. Should I sit? So what's the value of the flower? You can look at that and say, does its value change when your senses change? Are your senses in charge of the sense of your value you place on the flower? Are your senses in charge of the value? No. Does this change the picture? And so you see a simple widening of the lens of your senses changes your view of things. like a camera. What you focus on is what you get, is a friend of mine. Focusing on the positive intent of things will also change your perspective and increase your power, especially if you want the positive intent to unfold, because it's the law of attraction. What you focus on is what you get. So in order to be able to solve the problems on the planet right now, we're going to have to change our focus. Somebody once said you have to see with new eyes. You have to hear with new ears. You have to sense with new senses. What the world does that mean? It means exactly what it says. If you're visually dominant or audio dominant or kinesthetic dominant, you know, get over it. There's a way you can do it. Use common sense. That's probably the most ignored sense of all in our day and age. Kids aren't meant to use it anymore much. Okay, so here's one thing we can do. We can start using our attention, our imagination. So if you're going on the freeway and somebody cuts in front of you and you go into road rage, you have alternatives. And one thing you can do is mellow out. You know how that shoe advertisement goes, mellow out? So you can do that by having a place of peace. This is a picture of my place of peace. It's in Maui, right across. My folks had a Honda there. And I would sit under this tree and literally go into an altered state of being at peace. Now, why would I do that? That's why?
Because you're in Maui.
Yeah, because you're in Maui. Everybody does it. Unless you know Maui is really, really kicking it incredibly. I do it because in this system that we've been talking about this whole conference, there's one condition necessary, that you relax. So we have all these traditions in the world that teach you to relax, because when you relax, what happens? What happens when you relax?
Conductivity goes up.
The conductivity goes up. It's just like, come on, it's science, you guys. And so the conductivity goes up, and then what happens? Everything starts working, and in fact now you might have the opportunity to invite into your highly conductive system the flow of information that tells you who you are. Your hyperspatial counterpart is a one-to-one relationship with you in reality. And once you get that, your entire life changes. How do I know this? Because I've seen it tens of thousands of times. With kids on drugs, with people in criminal maximum security prisons, multiple rapists, murderers, politicians, businessmen, wives, kids, teenagers, 2-year-olds. We're in a hospital for the children of Chernobyl. Radiation had given them all leukemia. And some of our holodynamic trained people went into the West Wing and started having the children heal themselves. The doctors found out about it because it was the only place in the hospital that they were having healing. Came down and found out it was a bunch of people who weren't certified as medical doctors, and they kicked them all out. I was so ticked about it, I went down to Chernobyl, to the city, and spent 3 months training the families, the parents, how to do this with their children. More stories here. Sorry about that. Here we go. So you got a tiger by the tail, go to your place of peace. It's an alternative. When you get there, ask your full potential what to do. My best friend is my full potential self. I don't get up in the morning without first saying, what's my job today? What do you want me to do that could best fulfill my potential today? And I write it down. And I make sure I do it. If I don't get it done that day, it's still on the list for the next day. People say, well, how come you do so much? And I say, I don't. I just follow the path of my full potential self. So when you're in a situation like this, causes you stress, do you think stress management would be a good subject for you to be able to help people with? Well, guess what? This will show you how to do it. What's the worst that could happen if you can plan it so you can handle the worst? And what's the best that could happen? And when you focus on what's the best, what do you get?
The best.
So you'll see this in family systems. Some family systems are, in fact, really chaotic. And other family systems are quite orderly. If you come and see my family, all of my kids, I cannot remember a single time in my whole life when any of my kids were ever a problem. We focus on solutions all the time, but we were never problems to each other. Now you watch my kids, I mean, they sing like, oh, man. They are just perfect singers. All they have to see a musical thing once, and they can sing it in perfect harmony. And there's just one time through, and then they can perform with it. They're absolutely amazing kids. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about them because that takes them a lot. Anyway, so what part can imagination play in your life? Whatever you imagine, you can bring about, if it's within the boundaries of reality. So what if you were traveling, flying in space, and you look down at this blue Earth globe we have here, this satellite system we're all on. We're all members of this crew of satellite Earth. What would you choose to do? How about be born? Where would you be born? Where would you focus? What if you could choose your home? What if you could choose your mate, your family, your job, your friends, your thoughts, your feelings, and even your income? So imagine that. Suppose you're able to fly among the life forms and see all the people. Would you rather be a tree? Some days you'd rather be a tree, right? How about would you rather be a manta? Mantas are way more intelligent than we are. You'll have to read The Dance of Life to understand that one. First story in The Dance of Life about my experience with a manta. They can fly among the stars and all that kind of stuff. How do I know? Because a manta took me there. And he finally looked at me and said, "Don't you know anything?" No, you want to experience your world. Oh, well, watch this. Took me over all these coral reefs, all that kind of stuff. It was an absolutely amazing experience and so real that if I swim in those coral reefs, I recognize them. So, you know, don't tell me it was just my imagination. There's something real happening there. And for us to handle what we're going through in the world today, we need to get real. And we need to recognize that we're not the only intelligent things in the universe. And we're not the head of the food chain either. So here's Stephen Hawking. I realize some of you may not have much faith in Stephen, but this is one of the great things I learned from Stephen. He said, look, time bends, and this is what it looks like. So if you look at this thing, you can see this. Here we are today, up here with this little guy here. Can you see my finger here? Up there on the top. That's now, and we're going down this trail of time. And all we can see is what's in the future, and we can look and say, well, that's what happened in the past. And that's not how reality is. My evidence shows, and I've researched this for years, so it's like I have experience in this, and I have a research method that I think gets such great results that the results speak for itself. But I don't have an instrument to measure this. Nevertheless, the proof is in the pudding. And when you do this, when you understand this, you will be able to take those beliefs of your ancestors, the real things that are handled down through the holodynes in your microtubules, and passed on to you as the sacred beliefs of your ancestors and modeled for you by your family members. You'll be able to take those and transform them. You can do what we call a relive process. You can go back in time, literally, back in time, visit the traumatic experiences that happened that caused you to believe all this stuff you believe that's destroying so much of the planet and your families and life and everything else, and causes continual war and causes the divisions among religions and the divisions among schools of thought and all of that kind of thing. And you'll be able to transform all of that naturally, easily, and by the processes they've been talking about in this whole conference. There's ways to apply those processes that make everything just click into a harmonic that is totally synchronicity in the past, the present, and the future. You can visit the future, you can come back into the present, and bring the information with you. I want to talk about some of the technologies we have that we're putting into use now that are like the ones they're talking about here. We have remediation parks where you can recover all the resources, 100% of them, turn them into a stream of new resources in your community, and literally make resources from them, like cars that never have to be recharged, electric cars that go on a supercapacitor battery and have solar paint and have a grid on the front, so when you go down the road you're collecting pollution out of the air. You can take that pollution in little grids and put them into the gas station, and they'll pay you for them and give you a new one, and the oil companies take the pollution out of the grids and use it to get more oil. All of that's known technology. The batteries that'll run your car for 10,000 miles without a recharge. We're doing all that, and a lot of other things. A wellness library, multi-dimensional information system. In fact, Scott Moore's here. Scott Moore is the originator of the multi-dimensional information system in this whole program. It's a computer program that does multi-dimensional stuff on your computer screen. So you never lose your page, and the subject will take you through any place you want to go with that subject. We have researchers. It would be okay to have him come up and talk about this for a second. Would you like to hear about this one little technology?
Yeah.
Is that okay? We got a mic for him. Sure. Oh, there we go.
So now I'm going to try to follow this guy
Be there.
in conversation. First, a bit of an introduction. Earlier today, somebody came up to me and they said, Scott, they said, where are you?
I'm going to pull you out of that screen. Yeah, over here. There you go. Then I can see you. This is Scott.
They said, Scott, where are you? You're not here. And I thought about that. And so the question I had, well, if I'm not here, where am I? And from what we've heard so far, we have a counterpart in hyperspace. And so the ability to step in and out of this reality, linear time, go up through the wave, up into the holodynamics frame of reference, take a look around, come back down, right? And have something to talk about. So that's my answer for somebody who, Miss Callie, of course, always peeking in. And so he invited me up here to talk about multidimensional information systems. And
He's the dean of the Holodynamics Department of Information Integration, by the way.
And of course, I'd like to get to that.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Because it's not quite what you think it's about. And the minute that we start talking about information systems, we automatically think, computers and hard drives and et cetera. I mean, that's an application, right? So we'll get there. But I'd just like to talk about, how I met this guy, because I think it's relevant to a dynamic that we've been experiencing here in the room. And I heard something from Dan all through his material about events and experience that come to us. And that being in phase, right, being in harmonics, and being able to ingest the spin made interesting sense to me, because it gave me, an idea about how to meet the world that arrives. So I'm walking through a bookstore, and I find the Holodynamics book sitting on the shelf, and I go to reach for it, and just before I grab it, the book jumps out, and it lands in my hand.